Scott? None. Sue? No. None. Celeste? None. Mike?
No, sir. No, ma'am.
None for myself. Workshop topics, ready and go.
Yeah, so I'm excited to welcome, I'm going to turn the camera on, sorry. Excited to welcome Sid and Evan and David. I know David's in transit right now, but he'll join us probably in a second. And I don't know, Evan, is Susie or Sid, is Erica jumping on, or should we proceed?
Proceed.
Okay.
Yeah, on my end, Susie will not come.
Okay. I'm going to turn the time over to Evan, and he may call on some other folks to help, but take us away, Evan.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously, first and foremost, thank you for your time. I know you all have been anxiously awaiting updates and information, and we've had a really, really great process here, thanks in huge part to Skylar, to Michael, to Celeste, to David, to Sid and his team, and we're excited to share the information that we've put together for you so far. So in terms of timing, we're going to go for about 30 to 35 minutes. There's a lot of information to cover.
Recording in progress.
All right.
A lot of information to cover, admittedly, and as we go through this process, we're going to cover all of it, but at a pretty high level and a pretty quick clip, with plenty of time at the end for discussion. So on our agenda for tonight, we want to start, for those of you who aren't familiar or would like a quick refresher, with a very brief overview of our companies, my company, Sports Facilities Companies, and Sid's Scott Edwards Architecture. And then we'll go through a quick overview, a reminder of the scope of work, and sort of how that fits into a macro process as we see it. From there, we will start off by sharing the definitions of success, which are really the guidelines for the project and the work that we're doing. We'll talk through the process of identifying the programs and services that are targeted for the SRC, and then we'll go through the highest and best use of the facility. Sid will take over for a while there and talk through insights related to the site, the building, and the diagram and uses of spaces as we've outlined them. And then I'll take back over and walk you through the financial forecast and the economic impact analysis. We'll wrap up with some key assumptions and notes, and then sort of a final, final overarching assessment. And then we'll turn it over for discussion and next steps. So that's the agenda as we've outlined it. Hopefully that covers everything you were hoping. But again, if not, we can certainly cover anything else you'd like through that discussion and next steps period. So just very quickly, Sports Facilities Company is my organization. We were founded in 2003 as a company that's primarily focused on sports, but we have expanded dramatically. We kept the name, Sports Facilities Companies. That said, we are heavily, heavily involved in local recreation all over the country and in parks and recreation projects. In fact, if you take a look at our map of facilities, and this needs to be updated, but today this shows 29 locations across the country. We actually manage facilities in 36 different locations, including 3 of those where we manage all parks and recreation components for the community. And then every single one of these facilities has a significant focus and commitment to local service on not just sports, but also recreation, in many cases wellness, events, and entertainment. So we feel like we're really well positioned, obviously, to provide great insights and recommendations through this process. And again, I just wanted to reiterate, don't let the name sports distract you, because we are a lot more than that in our actual operations and what we touch on a daily basis.
Great. Thanks. My name is Sid Scott, founding principal of Scott Edwards Architecture. We're a Portland-based design firm. I started the firm in 1997. We currently have a staff of 95. I personally have a focus in community-based projects, so that's including recreation centers, cultural centers, libraries, civic centers. So really enjoy those types of projects. It's really been fun for me to get to work on this. And then we've done a lot of work on the Oregon coast, north of you, south of you, east of you. And today I realized west of you as well, as I had a small office in Hawaii for a while. So, gotcha. All right.
Excellent. So, you know, in terms of the scope of work, really it falls into 4 primary steps, but we've got a lot of sub-steps underneath that I won't go into the details of. But we started off with strategic planning, highest and best use modeling. Most of that work was done as we were leading up to our time on site, and then in our few days there in Seaside and coming out of that. And then we moved into the pro forma and economic impact forecast, which really went side by side with the uses of space and the design and implementation planning, and ultimately wrapping up and coming to the end here with a final report. But obviously this workshop is critical and important as we go into that. So just to put it into sort of the grand scheme of things, as we take a look at it from the sports facilities company's planning side, we consider this to be pretty early. Step 1 and step 2, obviously some of the funding has already been taken care of because you own the building. But future funding, partnership development, the decisions related to tenant spaces and use of those tenant spaces, improvements to the building, outfitting spaces for FF&E, all of those pieces will come in the future. And then, you know, you're already operating some programs and services within that building, but moving forward into daily operations, proliferating the services that you're providing to the community, and then ultimately getting to step 9, optimizing your performance, the services you're providing, the way that you're generating revenue, and the way that you are ultimately making this the very best, most impactful facility and set of operations for the community. So when we get started with a project, the first thing that we want to do is understand the guardrails and the goals. And so we call those the definitions of success. And we worked with several of you, perhaps all of you at one point or another, certainly representation from all of you, but also from the community through our interactions. And we came forward with this 5-component set of definitions of success. And so the first is to create a hub for the community, promoting health and equity, really reaching people of all ages through sports, recreation, wellness, you know, arts, music, etc. Widespread programming, touching everyone, and creating that hub for activity and for people to gather within the community. Number 2, pretty simply, to make sure that it is something that makes Seaside a better place and makes SEPRD's services more impactful. And so through that process, improving sense of place and enhancing the quality of life for residents, and obviously not just Seaside residents, because your district is larger than that. So the 10,000 plus people that you serve. Number 3, becoming a model community for addressing, in particular, child care services. We know that there's a shortage, not a small shortage, of opportunities to get kids before they're in school on a regular basis, served really effectively in safe environments, in educational environments, in healthy spaces that are controlled, and as I said, you know, I'll put it back sort of at the top, in that safe location that's well-directed, well-led, and really progressive for kids. The 4th definition of success, sorry, I don't know if it's delayed on your end, but everything's taken a minute to pop up here. Excuse me. Is to create and really support a driver of off-season economic impact and visitation to the area. Obviously, you're already doing that with the courts that are at the SRC, particularly through your partnership with Pacific Basketball League, which we've interacted with directly, but making sure that that's still at the forefront, that this can't just be about only local service. It also has an opportunity and should be used as an opportunity to bring people into the market that would not be there but for a tournament, an event, or something else going on at the facility. And finally, this is kind of a 2-part component, but to leverage revenue generating opportunities through the programs and services, and creating a path for long-term sustainability. Now, I do want to clarify that most of our clients, particularly parks and recreation clients, aren't looking at sustainability as self-sustaining or covering debt service or anything like that. They're looking at it as, is this viable for us to operate? Because you will have to offer services and programs for people who may need financial assistance or need a place that is less expensive than some other private providers, And so, again, these 5 definitions of success really guided our work, and we wanted to make sure that we were looking at every single one of these through everything that we were evaluating, recommending, analyzing, etc. So through that process, we identified an awful lot of programs and services. This is a list of sort of what landed, and we break that down into categories. You're going to see all of these reflected in the full pro forma, but suffice it to say, it's not simply about childcare, it's not simply about sports tourism, it's not simply about sports, but it's really about community programming, arts and crafts, dance, performing arts among them, cooking, special events, education, etc. And so each of these, we went through a process of analyzing, assessing, creating structures, pricing, understanding what would be an in-house program versus a partner program using a vendor or another service provider within the space, but really taking a holistic approach to programming out what happens at the SRC. And so from a highest and best use perspective, as we looked at the building and the targeted programs, we've got some overarching messages that I'll share, and then I'll turn the details over to Sid. So first and foremost, maybe the most important thing that we'll say tonight, this is a viable and valuable location. This building, we were very pleasantly surprised as we walked through the building, as we continued our analysis going forward, for what SEPRD's goals are for the SRC and for expanding their community service. This is a building that is really ideally suited to activate quickly, to make an impact, to serve people. And so that in and of itself is a big check mark, and probably for many of you in the room, maybe all of you in the room, it's not surprising, but I know it's reassuring to hear that from our professional perspective as well. And then the other thing that we were really pleased was not simply that it's the right location or that the building is big enough, but it's really the layout of the building as a former school building and alignment with the programs and services you want to offer. The spaces in the room within the building lend themselves to pretty much everything that we wanted to do. Now, of course, some improvements, but making some major upgrades to this facility isn't necessary at this time to start activating and really start bringing in a lot of the programs and people that you want to serve. And so the other piece of that is the time to activate, and quite frankly, that's now. These spaces are already obviously in use for some programs, but the vast majority of the programs that we've projected and recommended, they can start very quickly. As soon as you're ready to roll them out into this building, it will be able to accommodate them. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sid and walk through some of the comps and the recommendations, the outlines that have been put together by the SEA team.
Oh, thanks, Evan. So one of the things that we did in mid-October was took a tour to Lincoln City and to Newburgh and toured two facilities in each location. Skylar, Celeste, Michael, David, and myself took a tour. And so I will just briefly mention these. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have. These are all actually 4 projects that I have done over the years, but have some tie with your project. So the first one, the Lincoln City Community Center, had a 1980s original building that was an aquatic center. And when we were brought on, we put an addition on it, renovated the aquatics, but also put an addition on for recreation purposes. So it had a 1980s building, then a early 2000s building. The recreation portion consists of creating new lobby space, really like new excitement for the center. And so I see it in a lot of ways like your project, creating excitement around this idea of a community-based recreation type project. So there's, they put a climbing wall in, which was really cool, 2-story fitness center, a gym, and it has an elevated running track along with group fitness kinds of spaces. So very recreation heavy. The Lincoln City Cultural Center is a 1930s elementary school that was surplus, and the city bought it, and a nonprofit now runs the cultural center in it, so it's actually owned by the city. But that project was, and is still ongoing in terms of phases, and we really essentially used the school like it was. The gym, which had a gym and had a stage in it, that's now this actually quite nice multi-purpose theater space. The classrooms, we turned them into art galleries, movement studios, performance space, art classes, there's a kitchen in it. And it's ongoing in terms of their work that they're doing in converting it. Most of the spaces have been refurbished and are being used for its new purpose. And in addition, they're working on a plan around the exterior, which is going to create plaza space where they're going to have farmers markets and art shows and all those kinds of things. So that's the Lincoln City Cultural Center, and again, a tie-in with being a school, renovated, and really used a lot of it like it is, with some refurbishment. In Newburgh, we visited the Chandler Aquatics and Fitness Center, which was a 1960 pool building that we actually built a new aquatic center on. And then when that was completed, renovated the old pool building into a new recreation center. And that includes gym, elevated running track, fitness center, group fitness, all those kinds of things. One of the, I think, cool things about this project was the original building was not the most attractive, but we didn't have money to really alter the exterior of it. And so through, I think, nicely done painting, landscaping, it really blends in nicely with the project and really gave it like a new, fresh look. So simply painting can get you a long way in terms of creating that kind of the new feel to it. And then the fourth project, the Chandler Cultural Center, again, was a 1930s elementary school surplus. The Park and Rec District actually bought this for $1, and we went to work on it. And in many cases, again, reusing the classroom spaces for new purposes. And we converted the gym into a ballroom, which has been very popular. Art galleries, there's actually a music studio in this. And we're just starting the next phase, which is the old theater. So we'll actually have a legitimate theater there. So again, a nice tie-in of reusing old school, in this case, older than yours, just by quite a bit, but making something very nice out of it, and in many ways just reusing it like it was. So any questions, Skylar, Celeste, Michael, want to add anything to that?
Well, I remember that tour very well, and particularly I noted that the Newburgh, the cultural center there, was needing to do about $500,000 a year fundraising to maintain and to perhaps inch ahead with capital projects. I was very impressed with the seismic work and restoration had been done. So the upstairs, which was largely undeveloped, looked kind of ready to build out. And I thought, you know, that was all interesting. The artwork and the level of display for artwork in the hallways was very impressive and was very professional and very, you know, accessible kind of use for the first floor largely. So I was impressed with the Cultural Center in Lincoln City. Also, it had small spaces generally, the gym being the largest single space. I was impressed that they had rooms for sewing and for actually weaving with the room for looms and so on. And they had meeting rooms, and I recollect, you know, $85 a day rental on a fairly small meeting room. But it was nicely appointed and redecorated with schoolhouse lighting and so on. And I remember the one small gallery that had replaced the exterior windows. I assume there's some kind of historical status related to that, and they used TDLs on those restorative windows, which would be true to form, and they were not necessarily insulating, glazing on there. But it was very interesting to see the sparkling results at Chehalem Aquatic Fitness Center, and those bodies of water, the it seemed to be 3 separate pools, but they were basically 2 pools that were, that flowed together in one room. The competitive pool was very impressive, and it was some nice work by you.
Appreciate that. I love the point you just made, Michael, about all these projects, well, both cultural centers, the old elementary school renovation projects, have all been done in phases. And so in each case, we came up with a master plan, and we put in infrastructure, meaning HVAC, the things that are going to be needed eventually, and we put all that in at one time so that as it develops, we've got the infrastructure in place to accommodate the future expansion. So that's something very important to look at as you look at your facility and how you want to approach it. But it's really having that master plan to guide your development, and that includes all the infrastructure pieces of it as well.
I think Sue had a question.
I was trying to figure out, I mean, we see the finished product and we're on the other end of that. How does the budget work to make that all come about?
Hi, Sue, this is Sid. Do you have a particular one you're asking about, or just in general?
Just in general. I mean, I'm wondering, I mean, what you took, I mean, the after picture looked wonderful, and, but it did come about overnight, and I'm just curious how, I mean, was there, you know, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3? I mean, did it take 20 years, 10 years to make it look like that? And how did you coordinate the budget with each process?
That's a great question. And just as an example, the J.L. Cultural Center, what's up on the screen here, I started on that in 2005. And we are just starting phase 4, which is half of the upstairs. So that's how it went. We did an overall master plan for this originally, and so that we would have a continuous plan, including outside. So it's how do we use the outside spaces and really integrate with the city, and because it's just off of downtown and similar to your location. And we really looked at how we could extend the building out to the city, and be inviting and bring activity. And so that was a big part of it as well. So it's not just the building, but it's also the spaces around it as well. But we did a master plan, and then we broke it up into phases and said, okay, so this looks like a reasonable way to do this. For instance, the first phase, we did the lobby and half of the downstairs and 2 rooms upstairs, just the way that it worked. And then the second phase, we did the half of the other half of the first floor. And then third phase was the finishing the first floor. And now we're starting phase 4. And I think in the end, there will probably be 6 phases to this project. And what I really admire is that they raise the money and then they spend it wisely, like a really good quality project that's going to last for 50 years. That's like our approach on how we're doing it. So I'm guessing that I'll probably work on this for 25 years before it's done. That'll be my record. My last one was 17 years.
So, can I follow up? I mean, how long do you foresee being partnered with us to make this work?
25 years.
I mean,
I think I got another good 25 yeyears in me, so what can we get in 25 years?
I think, Sid, if I could add, I think one of the things that struck me in being able to see these facilities, and it's a little tough to get this feeling when you see pictures on the screen, but when you see them in person, you can really see what gems they are in the community and how they really contribute to the feel of the community. It really was pretty stunning to be able to see how they fit in and what the neighborhood around these facilities look like. And I just think, particularly given the high-profile location of our building, how important that's going to be.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, Celeste. I think you're in such a great location. To me, there's such an opportunity to say a lot about Seaside, you know, for folks that are driving down 101 and see this. And much like the Salem Cultural Center, you know, that, again, has that same kind of impact there. So I think I'm very excited about the opportunity that you have. And I think, you know, you have a good base to start with. And really better than what I started with on both these other projects, both cultural centers. So to answer, Sue, your question about time, it's as long as it takes.
Well, and my background that I'm still a member of the Multnomah Club, and that has gone through extensive renovation, and you just, you know, that pardon your dust sign, and the old pool I started swimming in is gone, and they built an Olympic style, well, they built more than one. It was just fascinating because we included the public. So I would go in as a kid and I could see pictures of what was changing. And I remember that made me feel like I was part of it. And so I think that's interesting to see the longevity that you're proposing. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be wonderful if you could do it all at once and you do everything, but I mean, that's not my experience. That's a rarity. And so you just, you know, to me, you need to be creative, do it right, and put the infrastructure in place so that you don't get in your own way down the road, you know, in terms of as you make improvements. Yeah, the Mac Club is a great example. I think they have the Endless Project over there.
I appreciate that. I still get the magazine, and it's like, this is our project. You know, so there's always something.
Yep, yep. Okay, any other questions or thoughts? Okay, we'll jump into the next section, which is taking a look at, and this is a very high-level look at the building. But as Evan was saying, you know, the nice thing is you've got a building that's usable, you've got spaces that are usable. So we just took a look at it in kind of general zoning and how you could orient spaces, combine spaces. And so that is the plan on the left, and I can go through that in as much detail as you'd like. But basically the idea is the overall layout of the building lends themselves to the program spaces that you're looking for without having to do significant improvements. I mean, you can certainly do those, but this is really how can you get it up and running kind of approach. I think we would, you know, going through it, you know, it'd be nice to be able to upgrade finishes and those kinds of things to give it a fresh look. But again, it is usable in many cases like it is now. There's two short-term improvements that we talked about that we think would be some benefit. Well, actually would be, I think, a significant benefit. So in terms of how the plan is organized, the green spaces and the blue spaces are the community recreation portion. And so we've got all the classrooms and the gyms and the lockers and all those things in that area. Our thought was to create a community recreation entrance on the northwest corner, so facing 101. So it have its own entry. That way, the circulation and the spaces would all be connected together. And then down on the bottom is the Early Childhood Center, so child care in the yellow area, with a covered drop-off entry on the south end of the building. And then to the left of that, the gray zone tenant space, which is what you're doing now currently. So that would be future space for you to be able to develop to whatever, you know, whatever needs came along, whatever programs you had the opportunity to do. Within that green area, the library, and I think, are you sitting in the library?
We're at the Bob Chisholm Center tonight.
Oh, that's right. I'm thinking we've met in the library space before. Gotcha. So anyway, the library space one of the thoughts there is to convert that into a cardio and weights room. So it's like a nice size for that, and I think it would be fairly economical to be able to do that, and that would give you that whole component to provide as a program space. And then across the hall from that, where the cafeteria currently is, if kind of with a way to be able to divide that off so that the hallway could continue, but you could still have the space enclosed, maybe as a movable wall type of an idea, hopefully glass so it's transparent. But that would give you the ability to have that as a special event space, which also could have nice access to the outside, to the east of the building there. So those were two improvements for that kind of community rec space that would change the kind of size and configuration of what they currently are, those two uses. Let's see, did I miss anything? I think those were the two kind of bigger ideas. I did want to point out, I know that you have a study that was done by Open Concept Architecture, did an analysis, like a code analysis of the building. And I've been reviewing that as well and thinking, a great step here would be to take everything that they're talking about in terms of the basic things that you need to do from a code standpoint, along with some of these ideas that we're talking about, and marry those together so that we really see what needs to be done to, take you to the next step with the project. So anyway, aside from that, that's the general idea on what we saw as a zoning kind of opportunity for the building. And then on the childcare side, can you go to the site? Any questions on the plan?
I have one.
Yeah.
So I know several people, including myself, were wondering about an indoor walking track during our lovely winter weather. Is that anywhere in the idea of all this?
So the simple way to do it would be to be able to use the hallway spaces.
Correct. That's what I expected.
And yeah, and if you go back a slide, so there's opportunities there to create a donut, and it could be a big donut or a smaller donut, because you've got the midway hall cut across there. So it seems like, and it's actually a pretty good walk around there. I did it several times. That seems like a real opportunity, particularly the bigger version, kind of the mall walking concept.
Right. That's what I have several other people mentioned. Don't make anything, don't change it, just let it be accessible.
This?
No, up left, right there.
Oh, it says expansion for community recreation, or community rec.
We're looking at the light orange or salmon colored, Sid, and what
Kind of
that,
in the northwest corner,
Yeah. Yeah. So those were two spaces that we did not have program designation for. So it's an opportunity for some expansion or multi-purpose or, whatever kind of program that, you could use for it. Which is cool. I mean, I think that's one of the nice things about the size of this project is you've got room for expansion. Both literally, if you were going to build some new stuff, but also internally.
I had a question, Scott, or Sid. Down proximal to the yellow, the childcare area, there's a large atrium in the middle of the building. Do you think that atrium could be made into a playground area that would serve the childcare and the preschool? Would it make any sense to put a roof over that, an atrium kind of roof, or simply make it into a playground space that would be outdoors, but proximal to the classrooms?
Yeah, Michael, that's a really interesting idea. We actually looked at that. We were discussing that. Our kind of concern about it is the noise factor. They're, typically very noisy areas, and within a confined space like that, it's going to get even louder because of the acoustics in there. And then you've got tenant space on the other side. So that would be a concern, I think, just from the noise standpoint. It would be nice to use that space for some type of, I mean, to me, it looked great to have some kind of green space in there. But that would be my concern, would just be the acoustic side. We were actually proposing to do a playground on the east side of the building where those classrooms go directly out, which is the ideal setup for childcare. But what that would require, if we go to the site plan, Michael, did you have any other questions about that?
I like the idea of the high-end event space. I think we could do some marketing around a very useful and attractive event area in the old cafeteria.
Yeah, I think that could be a really cool space. You've got direct access to outside. The volume of space is big enough that it's, I think, very nice space. So on the site usage, I'll start with down at the bottom there, where the childcare area, what we were talking about, proposing the childcare area there. But one thought would be to actually block off that service drive, turn that into a really active play space for children as part of the Early Childhood Development Center. Then we would look at the north side of the site to run an access road to get it around to where the batting cage building is in the center of all of that area. So that's one consideration for the site. This also indicates the idea of a three building. And that's something to think about in terms of the program and how you manage it. But we thought with three distinct ideas, it makes it very clear on where you go. And then once you're inside the building, also very clear where you go inside the building. And then in addition, you've got space off the north side of the building or the east side where potentially you could add more building space.
I have a question. Whatever
Yes.
happens to the racquetball building possibly going there?
Yeah, I haven't really heard a formal proposal. I mean, when I shared it with the board, it was kind of a very loose pitch that somebody threw at me and said, "What do you think about this?" So, and I don't even know if I shared it with Sid and Evan, but Sid, we had a gentleman who is purchasing or wants to purchase a standalone building, a pole barn that sits somewhere else in our community and wants to relocate it somewhere else and offered to relocate it to this property somewhere and then donate it to the district, and we could operate. There's no other, I don't think, racquetball facilities, at least in our county, I think. So anyways, still probably a ways away from that happening if it were to happen, but we had talked potentially about the only location being maybe, on the north side of the building somewhere where you have some green space that a building like that could sit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Do you know how big a pole barn?
I've been in there. I would say, I don't have the dimensions, but it's probably about half the size that the hitting facility is. Just by guess. It's only got room for one full-size racquetball court, so not terribly big. There's no locker rooms or anything else in there.
Gotcha. Okay.
And do we know the status of the softball situation over there? Because I know there was some discussion about needing to have more space for softball.
Sure.
Was that?
Yeah, I guess just looking at the map, we had discussed, or they had actually discussed with us the potential of having a softball field kind of working out, but the space there isn't large enough. What would that be? Left field line would be, it would be too close to the batting facility, so that's not a suitable location. There is a possibility that maybe we could extend the field out this direction a little bit more and create a Title IX compliant field for softball and baseball. They could play simultaneously, but that's kind of in the school district's hands right now.
Yeah, I think you could basically, you can see home plate, you could kind of shift it up a bit and push it back 20 feet, and then the lines in the football field wouldn't be in the infield, so it'd be the same as the baseball field.
Right.
And then it would, and I think that would be the cheapest way to do it, but I don't.
Without interfering with this plan for parking, I mean, one of the things
Yeah.
I really like about this plan for another official access route there is it doesn't have drivers driving through where the kids are, you know, right? And I think and it makes that side of the building more useful in lots of ways, including getting to the new batting facility.
Yeah.
So I think,
Yeah, Andy wouldn't even touch that future development, because you would kind of go, you'd be more going up.
right,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
but I guess the school,
I believe they're working, I vaguely overheard that they're gonna make an announcement on their progress with that at their board meeting.
Go ahead, Sid.
Yeah, I was just thinking that the idea of, so it sounds like, if I was hearing things correctly, the idea of access on the north sounds like a good idea.
yeah.
And, because one of the things that really struck me about walking out there, and I've been there several times just looking around, is that driveway really separates your complex. You know, like, if you get rid of that, and now you've got pedestrian connection, really nice space, very nice connection between the aquatic center, this spot, out to the ball fields, the community garden space, you know, to me, that'd be really cool to have that as just pedestrian space in there.
Well, and then, like, my kids go to the youth center there, and they use the playground that's right next to it, daily. And, people that are going to that hitting facility, they do not slow down. And so, you know, my kids, they're taught, you know, okay, look both ways multiple times, okay, go, you know, and it would be great. I wish we could, right now, just gate it, but without that other access, it would just be too much, you know, to get to the hitting facility. So, yeah, having another road would be fabulous.
I think
Yeah, to the north side, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I've long had the impression that lane through there, that continuous path around the school, is a fire lane. So I don't know how the city would look at developing that and eliminating a fire lane.
Well, I think, you know, we would definitely have to talk to the fire department, but even if we do put a gate that they have a key to, so, yeah,
A
you
gate
know.
would be good, yeah.
And,
We
and,
need to control that. I agree with that.
I think another thing that's interesting, and I know this is not quite in your purview, Sid, but, to me, by making that sort of campus or commons kind of, environment in the middle, I think it adds value to the other buildings that we have, to the rest of the facilities for future plans with that. I mean, I think it lends to the idea of expansion and upgrading of those facilities.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it really makes it more of a complex that the buildings, I mean, it's just, you're responding to creating space for the folks that are using it and not cars. Which, you know, I think is an important factor.
I just want to add, one of the things that Catherine said months ago was how this building, you know, being able to purchase it adds to the core of the community, you know, with the library and the Sunset Pool, et cetera. And I think it just, I just don't want to forget that, to make sure to include the public in understanding what a gem we have as a core of activities for health and well-being that fits the mission and vision statement for Sunset Empire.
Okay. Very good. Okay, other questions related to site?
My only other question had to do with, was there consideration given to the rest of the parking space and sort of how that plays in to traffic flow and user access and stuff like that?
Yeah, the level that we thought about so far is essentially wayfinding, like, you know, creating, if you create 3 separate entries to a building, then you gotta clearly let people know how to get to those and where they are. So I think that starts with the image, the signage that we have on the street, the highway, those those kind of things. And then, you know, moving in from the streets to the buildings, how we help delineate that. But I think one of the cool things you have, that the parking lot that is out there between the building and the highway, and we were there the night there was farmer's market, yes, thank you. Trying to remember what if it was an art event or what it was. But anyway, that idea of turning that into really kind of a bigger idea of public plaza and public space, I think is really, you got a big opportunity there. And that is such a great foreground to the building.
Agreed.
In Chehalem, in the Newburgh, one of the things we did is we actually tore out all the asphalt, put pavers in, to give it a feel like a plaza and that sort of thing, even though it still can be used for parking. So there's ways to do it that, you know, makes it more multi-use.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about the roads around, you know, like 101. Do you look at, when this was Broadway Middle School, the speed limit was 20 miles per hour between the stoplight at Broadway and 101, or Roosevelt, and past that last entrance? Because if we're looking at considering making that western entrance a main hub, would we need to look at considering keeping the speed limit at 20?
I think that would probably be through the ODOT, the Oregon Department of Transportation, because that's their highway.
Right.
So we would have to get them involved.
I would agree with the idea of doing that. I think the parks, all of our parks and recreation facilities and schools should have 20-mile-an-hour safety zones. And that should be reinforced from Broadway all the way down from Roosevelt
We can
to
ask,
Ohana.
but I think that's going to be their highway.
Yeah, as much as I would love to say absolutely, I've been around long enough to deal with ODOT on many occasions, and they don't really care what I think in many situations. So.
Well, we need to
They have the
fix that.
I think that's a really, really good thought. And in the big picture, I would definitely encourage you to look at that. So in general, just looking at the building, getting it operational, some short-term things, exterior, general cleanup, you know, again, painting could make a huge difference to how the building looks, adding signage and wayfinding so it's clear where you go. You know, and then I think that would really clean up the exterior. The interior, some of the areas like the gym, I believe it was Michael, you had the idea about having from the ball field access to the locker rooms, which I think that seems like a really good idea. So that gym area, freshening up the locker rooms, add the entry to the ball fields, converting the cafeteria space to special event space. I think, again, that is going to be some really beautiful space. Converting the library into a fitness center, so putting a new flooring, finishes, HVAC for that. Repairing and refurbishing the child care area and really get that, everything dialed in there. And then as you have money, refurbishing the other activity spaces, the hallways, the restrooms, and those kinds of things. And so, again, this is where we look at it, typically on, you know, multi-phased project. Depending on how much money that you have to be able to do it, and we want to make sure we put it in the absolute best spot we can. Use the money the best way we can. So those are kind of the thoughts in a nutshell. Questions, I think I've taken up way more time than Evan has allotted me. He hasn't sent me any notes to...
You didn't get the hook.
I didn't get, at least I didn't get it. Maybe they had tried, but I didn't get it. So anyway, those are some general thoughts about it. And you know, really for our next steps would be, like I was mentioning, is really take all the code stuff that you've got from the study, add the thoughts that we've got and combine them into kind of a master plan of what you need to do.
I just had a question that Mike had me thinking about that space, the atrium. Can that be considered into looking at some sort of educational opportunity in a greenhouse? So that we could teach something along the lines of, you know, I don't even know what you call it. It's all this hydroponics or something. So, I don't know. I mean, just thinking.
I think we've already kind of discussed that internally. I think of using that space as either a nature space for kids to spend time outside and learning about animals and plants and stuff, but also a calming space, because we know that when kids get to be outside a little bit more, then they're calmer in the classroom, they have better attention and things like that. So I think that's, using those atriums, I think, will be a key part, especially that first one there in the corner as we move forward.
So, yeah, and I think there's lots of possibilities, particularly for that upfront atrium, because it serves as what you see from the potential event space, depending on how you update that. But also, it serves that it's the view from the library, and so if that's going to be a fitness area, I think that's something to consider.
Yeah.
One of the things that I just wanted to point out that I really appreciated about some of the properties that Mike and I were able to visit with you is that how some of the entry spaces were really nicely delineated by a landscape kind of scheme that helped you see, it helped control the flow. So it broke up the facade of the building and showed you where to enter. And I just feel like, particularly given the 3 different entries that we're talking about, that there's some opportunity for that on this building. And the other piece, like, you know, I know the paint can do wonders, but I also really appreciated in the Chehalem Aquatic Center that there were some other architectural details that were added to the exterior of the building that really modernized the appearance. And again, I guess I maybe this is overly concerned with aesthetics, but I think given the high-profile view of the place, I would really love to see what we could do that helps build on. I mean, I think Seaside, and somebody who's been here for, you know, my whole life and seen the iterations of concern that have been given to the aesthetics of our community to make it welcoming for families and to make it a family kind of space, I would love to see us have some attention to the aesthetics of the outside of the building.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, and I appreciate that you picked up on how we had used landscape to help naturally cue people, you know, where to go and the circulation and all those kinds of things. But in each of the projects, you know, we had the same kind of discussion around even creating the image for the project. And I think it's really important that, you know, again, you put your money where you're going to get the most bang for it. And so it may be that we pick one area on the exterior and do something with that really makes the building identifiable or an identifier for the building. And sometimes you do that, and then the rest of the building you can paint it, but it's created like an image, like something new has happened. I think it's really important that the building is, you know, it's the perception and reality, it's being rejuvenated.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I just would like to make sure that as we move forward, that there's some sort of recording of what this was. So 15 years from now, we can say, look at what we did. Is that included in what you do? Like, we need to take off the Broadway School sign. Well, maybe we should keep that for some sort of history.
Yeah, I think that's always, I'm really encouraged that personally. You know, maybe that you have a sign and we put it up inside somewhere. It's in the gym, or it's, you know, there's a remembrance of what it was before. Often photos, this is what it was, you know, like the 1930s schools integrated. Well, we found historical photos and said, isn't this cool? This is what it was. And how can we modernize it but still keep that character? And, I think in your case, it's been built through multiple phases. So I think there's a whole story about that and the different generations of additions and still respecting that.
I might suggest that maybe we let them continue, just because I know Evan's on East Coast time. And so, Sid, awesome work, and thank you very much. I'm not sure if this is your last slide, but we want to be mindful of your and Evan's time tonight. So thank you again, and look forward to seeing the final report and talking more about it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Give it some great ideas.
Thank you.
All right. Well, obviously the design of the building is critically important, and then what happens in the building is, I'll call it equally critically important. So we've produced a detailed financial forecast. I'm not going to walk you through the entire forecast. I'm going to give you sort of a summary level view and dip into some of the details so you can see what's behind the summary level view. The first thing I want to share is obviously we've categorized these by the target programs. We've done an analysis and worked directly with Skylar on programs to determine what would be offered directly through SEPRD at the rec center and what would be partner programs and how those programs would be structured. We've taken a look at current prices and expected prices. We've taken a look at volume and growth in the programs over time. Here's the caveat that I want to bring forward, and that is, and you'll see this in a few slides from now when I talk about the notes and key assumptions, and that is that our expectation is not that everything, you flip a light switch and you run through everything all at the same time, right? There'll be an implementation plan, there'll be a rollout. Ultimately, we've structured this pro forma so that it's as easy as possible to take a look at which of the different programs you could be offering, and you can start to prioritize those based on any number of things. Because we've got, obviously, the revenue and the expense of those programs. We've also got the volume of those programs in terms of the number of people served and the number of times you offer it per year. And so all of that detail is within the pro forma. And while this says year 1, year 2, year 3, all the way through year 5, it is not intended to say, to communicate that you don't do anything until you can start to do everything. So just keep in mind, this is intended to help you scale as you go forward. But ultimately, as we break it down into the programs and then the specific offerings within this, we've categorized as 4 buckets, if you will. One is education and childcare, which includes school age and preschool and early education, as well as camps, and then safety, community safety. We've got arts, which is not simply art, but it's also music, dance, and cooking. Fitness, sports, and recreation, where you're excuse me, where your membership and fitness activities happen. Martial arts, as an example, in one of those spaces, although as you see there, that's one of the very smallest programs. Special events, sports and recreation, and then the tournaments that drive the economic impact. And then we've got other, your rentals, your tenants, and then just a light level of vending. So to give you some insight as to how the revenue actually breaks down, it's not just these bucketed numbers, but if we take a look at the largest individual revenue line, which comes from preschool and early education, you'll see that the year 1 revenue, if you did everything all at once, would be $300,000. And that grows to the point where it gets to above $400,000 per year through preschool and early education. So if we look at the back end of what goes into that revenue, sharing now this portion of the financial forecast, and I know this is small to see, you can zoom in on the actual document, of course, but we've got kind of, for preschool and early education, 4 categorizations. One is parent, infant, toddler classes. That's mom or dad or caregiver coming in with the child for a single class and paying $5 and doing that several times a year. We've got enrichment classes, which arts, music and movement, etc. Then we've got your preschool programs, which is where the overwhelming majority of the revenue gets driven, and that is for your under 3-year-olds and your over 3-year-olds. We've categorized it. So the way that the math works is pretty simple. It's just left to right. If you take a look at the final line here, preschool for kids over the age of 3, and you look at what we're charging, and this is in line with current prices, but $300 per month. And then we recommend that that grows slightly in year 3 and slightly in year 5 to keep up with inflation. You look at the total number of kids in that program, and so we've started with 50. That grows up to 64 kids in year 5 when you're sort of fully mature. And obviously, because it's a monthly program and they're paying $300 per month, we're running that 12 times per year. So if you take $300 times 50 kids, offering that as an average per month, offering that 12 times per year, that gets you to your $180,000 revenue line from that preschool program. And so I know $180,000 seems like a big number, $300,000 may seem like a big number. When you break it down, it's 50 kids in the preschool program. The under 3-year-olds, which would be new programming for you, it's more expensive, right? Infant classes are, or infant programs are more expensive, and then they get a little bit less expensive typically as you get older. But that's 25 kids in the first year, growing to 32 kids. So it's not an overwhelming volume of kids. It may feel like a lot of revenue, but that's sort of how the math works in the breakdown of revenue. Now, additionally, anytime you're running a program, you're obviously going to have cost of goods sold. The exception to that are these components, these 3, all of the cooking, all of the dance, and all of the music and performing arts are expected to be partnered with outside groups. So they'll charge the revenue, or they'll charge the program fee, and then they'll have a revenue split that comes back to the facility, SEPRD, however you want to categorize it. Same thing with martial arts. And from that perspective, you're actually not offering a program, you're providing the space. That's different from rentals, where you are charging based on an hourly rate to use a space, and they can do whatever they want. And then, of course, your tenants as well, it's a triple net lease. So they're paying all of their expenses. So there are some zeros in here, but let's go back to that first example of preschool and early education. $300,000 up to $400,000, $425,000 has a pretty hefty cost of goods sold. So you look at the revenue, and our structure, which is based on real programs and data from how these facilities and these types of programs work, includes a cost of goods sold on that same page. So it's a profit and loss statement for each individual business unit. And so if you look at the 2 categories of expenses, you've got your teachers, and then you've got your equipment, supplies, and consumables. As you would expect, your teachers, the hands-on people in the classroom, they are by far your biggest source of cost for servicing the program. So we've structured that as 50% of the revenue is paid out to the teachers. And on top of this, so these are the people in the classroom, but we also have a director position, and we've got a coordinator position that's in the management structure. So the reality is that when you add those positions and you take the 50% for the teachers and the 15% of your revenue that is spent on equipment, supplies, and consumables, you get to a $300,000 top line revenue, dropping $100,000 to the bottom line. Then when you take your full-time staff, that eats directly into that. And then when you consider your overhead expenses of utilities and everything else, as I think everyone here would expect, most preschool and early education programs, great community service, not profitable. Typically they are, break even, or they're going to cost you some money to put on, but that's a community service, and that's something that you've taken on as a goal to help solve this childcare desert that you've got. So that's a little bit of the structure behind the revenue and the expenses on the cost of goods sold side. Now, of course, you also have those overhead expenses. So I mentioned before, within the management structure, we've got a childhood education director and a coordinator, and so they're part of this $360,000 line. But your total operating expenses or overhead expenses consist of 4 categories as we break them down. Facility expenses, that's the cost of operating the building itself. Your operating expenses, are the cost of operating the programs inside the building, kind of the business. So, as an example, your utilities are wrapped up into the facility expenses. Sorry, I have the hiccups tonight. Your operating expenses include things like your insurance and your marketing and your photocopier lease, etc. The details are all there. So to give you an example, we'll go into those operating expenses. $143,000 in year one. It actually dips down a little bit because the marketing comes down and then it ramps back up. So it's about $150,000 per year. And if you look at the detail behind that, we've got all of these categories of operating expenses. Again, the cost of operating the business. And so I mentioned before insurance. We've got it at $46,000 per year. It's formulaic in terms of the percent of the total revenue that grows over time. Marketing and advertising, I mentioned before, when you first launch, you're going to have a pre-opening marketing budget, you're going to have a first-year marketing budget, and then as people are in the programs, there's word of mouth, there's retention of your existing customers, then you don't have to spend so much on marketing, so that actually dips down from $34,000 to about $18,000, which is the driver of this reduction from year one to year two, and then it climbs back up after that. So again, that's the structure for the overhead expenses. And if we look at all of it together, we look at the total revenue of, if you're offering them all at once in the first year, $1.15 million, up to about $1.6 million in year four. You take out the cost of goods sold, you're left with the gross margin, which is what's left over to cover as much of those overhead expenses as possible. And this facility is going to be somewhere in the $300,000 range early on per year in terms of the required subsidy to meet the operating expenses. And that will stabilize at about $250,000 and maybe a little bit better per year as you go through the maturation process and grow your programs and get everything rolled in. So I know those are big numbers. It's a lot of numbers. When you look at the pro forma, there's a lot of numbers. But let me pause there and see what questions you've got specifically on this summary, and then I'll talk to you about the notes and the assumptions that go into driving this and some clarification for you as you think about the financial forecast and implementation here.
I'm trying to just understand, since I can't read it really well, why are the parentheses? Is that negative at the very bottom?
Yeah, that's right. Yep. So your expenses, as is the case in the overwhelming majority of facilities like this. In fact, Michael mentioned fundraising about $500,000 per year in one of those facilities that you all visited. This does a little bit better than that, from that perspective, because it's got good revenue generation, doesn't have a pool, et cetera. So those are negative numbers because that's the annual operating subsidy.
And am I correct that when you're talking about, on the revenue pages, you're talking about fee for service to patrons or participants, and not looking at other external sources, for instance, subsidies from the state for running childcare or grants from foundations, individual fundraisers, things like that, right? So, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So just to touch on that point, when you look at the revenue line, sorry, a lot of clicks back here. It's a little bit. All of this is earned revenue from programs. There are no grants included in this. There are no community sponsorships. There are no annual giving campaigns to scholarship kids who may not be able to afford, et cetera. So all of those pieces come together into this operating budget. And then the annual ongoing funding, that comes through grants and other community partnerships to help cover that, $250,000 per year that we've landed at here.
Very good. And I'm a little bit surprised, I mean, at the line item anticipated revenue, although I recognize that maybe it's untested. Although we do have a model of PBL, that the sports and recreation line item revenue seems fairly low given what we know PBL brings in. If the district was to replicate that with another sport.
Yeah, so keep in mind that it is a low number, right? Sports tournaments are based on what we rent the space for. So PBL, pays a daily rental fee or an hourly rental fee to use the space, and then they are charging for the teams to register. So if a basketball team pays $300 per team and they run a 50-team tournament, obviously, you know, they're generating that $150,000 $15,000 in top line revenue for registration. They are paying to use the facility. They are generating the registration fees. They're also paying the referees.
Right. So in essence, that's a rental fee. The sports tournament
It
line
is.
item, yeah, a rental fee to PBL. Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, because I think, sorry, I think that line, Evan, I think I asked you about this in one of our earlier meetings. That doesn't include possible expansion of sports tournaments. That's just what PBL would do right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Which
So,
I think we
could-
think there's a lot of
Right.
potential there, right?
Yeah, one of the interesting things, would be the idea of charging a gate fee or a user fee for individual participant on top of the rental fee, you know, have a gate.
Well, they charge that. That's
They-
part of how they make their money.
Well, it might be how we
Yeah.
cover some of our funds too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the structure, so just to give you the detail, right, I just switched over to the pro forma just so you can see it. Each of those events are using the 2 courts in this facility, and it's a 2-day event. So this team information, 10 players per team, you know, there's no revenue there. And then those gate fees, just to that point that Michael brought up and that Celeste, I think it was Celeste responded to, we've said here, there are gate fees. They'll be collected by the rights holder. That's typically how they pay their referees, is out of the gate fees. And then they're covering their administrative costs, their marketing costs, their setup costs, their staff costs out of the difference between their team registration fees and the rental fees. But we've got a rental fee number in here, which is $400 per day and per court per day. And because it's a 2-day tournament and there are 2 courts, each time they run that tournament, there are 4 of them.
Right.
So they're currently running 8 tournaments in the market on an annual basis. They think that's the comfortable number for them. That it could expand a little bit with, you know, a better building and better relationship, although they have a great relationship they've mentioned with you. But you certainly have some upside and some opportunity, you know, wrestling and competitive dance events and martial arts events and whatnot. These would have a very similar structure, and you could easily go from 8 to 12 or 16 tournaments per year if that's an area of focus for you. But it's a fairly conservative approach to not only revenue generation, but also total volume.
So, I mean, I'd like to ask you, just when you are looking at these areas and all of those areas to build out, that you said, of course, we wouldn't turn on the switch and do all at once. Is there any particular area, knowing what you know about our facility and our district at this point, is there an area that you think would be your sort of best ROI investment to begin with? Like what?
Yeah, so the individually, the best ROI is going to come from membership. So I'm in the pro forma now. I'm going to stay in the pro forma. I can zoom in and out, obviously, on this. But if you take a look, you know, preschool, as I mentioned before, the preschool and early education programs are basically net neutral in terms of their operating by the time you factor in your other management structure. Alternatively, if you look at membership and fitness, which is your second largest individual revenue line, it's about $250,000 per year, growing up to $337,000, $338,000 per year, and you look at the net profit of that, zoom in here for you. So we've got a structure for youth, for adult, for senior. Let me just change the view here. Youth, adult, senior, and family, charging very reasonable rates, given what, you know, the value of a facility like this would be for a member. And then we've got a one-time fee the first time they register, that pay a joiner fee. So you look at that revenue, sorry if that makes you dizzy, but those are the numbers on revenue that I just mentioned, 246 up to 337, and you look at the profit of that, we're at $129,000 up to $192,000. So the total cost of goods sold for your teachers alone in the preschool and early education was 50%, and the total cost of goods sold for everything on fitness and membership is under that. It's 47%, and it gets actually a little bit better over time, down to about 43%. That individually is the best area for you. If you were targeting profit, you would target fitness and membership base. That said, if you're targeting service, there's almost no greater need you have in the community than the childhood education right now. And so it's that balance that we can't, we can provide insights and data. We can't make that decision for you. But if you wanted to start with profit, you would start here with this second biggest revenue line that generates a good bottom line profit on an annual basis.
And I think this piece is probably something maybe that, Skylar, we need to work with you on a little bit more. I think one of the things that I'm recognizing is this doesn't recognize the interplay of facilities costs with our existing facilities. In other words, some of these programming costs, some of these programs exist in other facilities currently. And so the building itself that we're running this analysis on isn't a standalone deal, right? That, for instance, some of the arts programming is in the facility that we're in right now, Bob Chisholm. And so what replaces that? Does it leave a hole and now run other facilities sitting in a deficit position? And so I think, to me, that I don't know if that's something you considered, Skylar, or something we need to look at.
Yeah, I think there's going to be heavy conversations and decisions. I mean, even just going back to membership, we've talked internally as a staff about how we would handle how the membership structure would work. You have a standalone facility at the SRC, but then you also have the pool facility where we sell memberships. So how that would work, how that would impact how the revenue draws out. Maybe there's a membership option for either one of the facilities or for both. But I think it's going to be really, I guess, interesting and probably challenging a little bit like a puzzle to work through how we do that, and then obviously marketing it out to our community and making the membership options that they have at both facilities, I think, really enticing.
Well, and I would like us to keep our eye on Cannon Beach is making a cultural arts center out of their elementary school. I don't know what's happening with Seaside High School and what actually is happening with Gerhardt Elementary. And I mean, it would be nice to be collaborative, not competitive, so that we can all grow. But, there's such a big picture, and I don't know. I mean, do you have review to any of the things going on with those two schools?
Some, but not enough probably to comment right now, unfortunately.
I do think Celeste's point about, some of the programming moving from, current buildings that we own or are using to the SRC kind of leaves a void in, revenue generating for those buildings. Like the youth center has been sitting vacant. And, the Bob Chisholm, if we move all of our fitness programs over there, it's a great event space, but then if we make an event space over there, are we going to promote this one? So trying to kind of keep everything balanced so that everybody,
I could see if we moved the fitness room over from where it is now behind the pool, which used to be a maintenance room, that could be a birthday party room that would serve the pool area.
I think the youth center would be
Well, the youth center is actually very much.
We used to use that.
Yes, that's true.
There's also consideration of storage for, if we ramp up the swim team, some equipment storage there that is so expensive that you don't want to move it too very far. But a birthday party room, that's kind of fun.
Well, we certainly don't want to void on revenue for those spaces because we've got electric meters and water and bills to pay, and lighting and so on.
Well, is there ever any thought that we would leave the Bob Chisholm and give it back to the city?
Well, the city still have it, we just manage it.
That's probably a discussion for another time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Evan, please proceed.
Yeah, just a couple of slides left. One of them is economic impact. So I just showed you those 8 growing up to 10 tournaments per year. Those are the drivers of non-local visitation. So we've obviously broken down those numbers of tournaments, but we've also broken down the cost of visiting Seaside. And so on a daily basis, based on the tournaments and based on costs of your local market and how people travel for those tournaments, we've done an analysis on the per person expenditure on a daily basis for coming in for a tournament for anyone who has to spend the night. So we break down into lodging, food, transportation, entertainment, retail, and miscellaneous. And when you sum all of those numbers up, the average per person daily expenditure is $155.18. If you take a look at those tournaments and the number of teams in those tournaments, the number of players, the number of spectators that travel with those players, and the percent of those people who come from a distance such that they have to spend the night, you get to the drivers of economic impact, which is the total number of days spent in the market by those people spending that money, and the total number of room nights. And when you multiply this top number, 7,616, times $155.18, you get to your total direct spending. This is the economic impact of those visitors. So that's about 1.2 up to $1.5 million per year by the time you get to 10 tournaments and events. So just to wrap up in terms of the last couple of slides, and then we'll pause again for questions. Some key assumptions and notes within the pro forma. Number one, we're basing the pro forma on the current layout with the physical changes that we've discussed today. I just mentioned this before we started the financial forecast review, but year 1 is not intended to be 2022. If you sum them all up, it's a full year of programming. So it allows you to step into the programming and can be used to guide decisions for areas of focus, etc. I mentioned before as well, so this is just a summary of some things you've already heard, but it is a blended model for your programs as the district, and then for the partner and contracted programs. And the financial model blends the existing programs, whether they are SEPRD or contractor vendor programs, the existing with new programs that aren't currently offered. I mentioned before, SEPRD not offering the younger version of the preschool program. The financial model is all based on a combination of historic data that we have from you, your expectations, and our analytical process. In terms of the expenses, the non-management staffing and variable expenses, so those cost of goods sold, they're primarily based on a percent of revenue. And they're a percent of revenue that we consider to be conservative and safe. But what that allows you to do is understand the scalability of each of those programs. So if you wanted to start your early education, but instead of, younger than age 3 early education programs, and we put in 25, and you hit 35 registrations in your first year, you know that those variable expenses are going to scale up, and we've got the notes in the full pro forma of those percentages, so you can change your budget to reflect the actual registrations. The fixed expenses is based on key performance indicators, our analytical process, and real-world operations. Plus, we've now received information from SEPRD for this actual building, as an example, of utilities, where we originally had the utility cost expectation was much higher than what it has been for the months of actual bills that you've paid so far. So again, we grossed those up a little bit. We know that you don't have a full winter under your belt, but you do have a full October worth of bills under your belt. And so we have adjusted that for the real world cost that you currently have of utilities in this building, and then it scales from there as you grow your programs. And finally, the last point here is that economic impact number that I just showed you, the 1.2 up to $1.5 million per year, those are only for the teams playing on these 2 courts. But PBL is going to use more courts, and they do currently use more courts. And so the economic impact of the entire event is much larger than what is encapsulated here at SRSV. And so it's important to recognize that as well. I don't want that number to seem scary low, right? Because I think, I believe this was stated in the RFP, the current economic impact from sports tourism estimation that you got is somewhere in the $10 million, $9 to $10 million per year range, and we were showing $1.5 million. That's because, again, we're only counting the 2 courts here, not the other, 4, 6, 8 courts that they're using in the market and surrounding areas. So that did take us a bit longer to get to this final slide, but this is our last slide of the night. For our final assessment, when we look back at what we've analyzed and what the results are, we go back to the beginning, and that is the definitions of success. And so, as we talked about, there were 5 definitions of success, and we believe that this is a facility that A, or number 1, can become that unique community hub for people of all ages and all interests. Number 2, that it absolutely has the opportunity and is already actually improving sense of place and quality of life for residents, so there's a check in that box as well. That you are going to have the opportunity through that dedicated child care area and expanding your programming and the addition of playground and everything else, that this will be, especially because you've already got a tenant in the building who is, focused on the same thing. You're focused on the kids in your community. They are obviously looking in the region, but that is a great strategy for improving child care services, so that's a check. The off-season economic impact and visitation, had you not purchased this building and had it been converted to something else and had the basketball courts been shut down, it's likely that PBL wouldn't be bringing any tournaments here anymore. So it's not just a 1.2 or 1.5, but they wouldn't have enough courts in the market to host all the teams. They'd have to look at other markets. And so you might lose not just the $1.2, $1.5 million per year, but the $9 to $10 million per year. And so it does help to create and support that driver of economic impact and off-season spending, off-season visitation. And finally, leveraging the revenue-generating opportunities and getting to the point where you see a path to sustainability. Those numbers are in brackets, to your point. It is going to require an ongoing subsidy from the operating revenue to cover the expenses, but between grants and outside funding and other funding strategies, not only do we believe that this is something that, as we've heard from Skylar, he feels comfortable with this level of sustainability, but it actually can be operationally self-sustaining when you're getting those grants, and those are reflected in the full final financial forecast. So overall, we had 5 definitions of success, we've got 5 boxes, and we've got 5 green check marks in those boxes. So, from our perspective, this is, as I shared, toward the beginning, this is absolutely a viable and valuable facility for programming for SEPRD as the SRC exists and as it will continue to grow and evolve, and a huge opportunity for you to expand the services that you're offering to your community to an even greater extent. So that brings us to the end of the presentation, a little bit over time, but I know obviously this has been for quite a while, a key initiative and a big point of discussion for everyone in the room. I'm happy to answer discussion, next step questions, but I do want to take one more opportunity to thank you for your time, your patience, your involvement, your investment in this from your attention and from your role on the board.
Go ahead, Sue, I know you've got them. I couldn't, I'm sorry, this was hard for me to follow because I couldn't read it. And so I feel like I took notes, but I put a big question mark here on the page. So I'm sorry, I feel like I don't have an educated question. Except I really feel like I get your 5 points and the steps to success. I saw negative money, but I know we generate such positive money when we do our monthly budget. So I don't see the connect between how we're going to lose money.
Sure.
And maybe that's not, see, I didn't get the point. So I feel like I needed it in front of me.
Yeah.
To see
Well,
it.
I think that's a good place maybe to start your questions with, like maybe.
You needed some stuff printed out in front of you to follow it on the screen.
This is we're not through yet, Evan. So maybe can you and I don't know if Sid is still with us, but can you just talk about what the next steps will be, how we can share this information, you know, not only with the board, but with staff and with the public, or should we wait until kind of the final report is shared with us?
Yeah, so, you know, tonight we will deliver this presentation deck back to you, and we'll send it directly to you, Skylar. You can distribute it to the board. My recommendation is that you, having gone through the presentation and heard it, and can go back through the document, obviously it's, you know, there's a lot of information there, but it's also a pretty good summary. This is not the final report. This is a workshop on the results and recommendations so that we can generate more dialogue. We've got a big written report, a full financial forecast, a lot of documentation on the building design as well as on the financial forecast. All of that is coming in a final report, but we didn't want to have, you know, a 40, 50, 60-page document with a huge appendix behind it and just deliver that and say, here's your study. We like having the opportunity to interact at this level, give you our verbal overview, give you the presentation version, which is kind of an executive summary of the full document, and then get a chance to reconnect. So this is an opportunity for us to share the information, send you some of the information, for you then to go through, for us to reconnect and recalibrate before we finalize a report with the plan to address any additional questions that you've got.
So, real quick, so to your question, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the negative numbers that were shown on the screen, so that does not include any grants, any fundraising, any tax revenue. It is strictly what we generate from the building and what it costs to operate those programs. So if we were to, we make money, you know, we see positive numbers monthly because our numbers include those things. They include the grants, they include the tax revenue, they include the fundraising. So that's how we would get those numbers that he is showing us to those positives, by doing those things. So right now, we don't have those numbers.
So I don't understand the phrase fundraising. I think I'm getting caught in the swim team talking about going out and raising money, and I really want that out of the picture. But I'm interested in what the public's perception is going to be, that we're asking them, and maybe, see, I feel like I'm out in the field, not understanding. So,
yeah, I think
so the fundraising isn't really like we're asking somebody to give us money.
The easiest way to look at this is kind of to Catherine's point. Like if you looked at the Sunset Pool alone, and looked at our revenues and expenses for that building alone, and you didn't consider our tax revenue basically, and any other ways that we might have of generating revenue, then we would be operating at a significant loss. That number that you saw in parentheses, that negative number, would be, you know, probably like $1 million every year. Okay? And that's what this did. It showed where the SRC would be at operating alone without any subsidy from the general fund, from our tax revenue, or without any other revenue generation, whether that's through sponsorship, grants, incorporating, you know, Gearhart into the district, all those other ways that we could generate revenue. Doesn't show that. So what I think is important is that the number was at, I can't remember, it was around $300,000 per year run.
80% cost recovery.
Right.
If you remember the cost recovery, remember the chart that we had, and that some of our stuff, the cost recovery is only at like, and I think this is true for aquatics, is about 20-25%.
Right.
In other words, 75% of the money for aquatics is subsidized from tax.
Yeah.
In this case, what Evan's numbers show is, even given the sort of what I would view as some pretty conservative estimates, we're at least at an 80% or so cost recovery, which means we can do all that additional tax, or all that additional programming without drawing down a huge, or depleting a large amount of our funds that come in by the tax base.
And fundraising is like the golf tournament that the fund, you know, through the through the
I think
foundation.
I think it would represent fundraising would represent a very small percentage, but
But, I mean, that's.
tax
what that
revenue or
means.
grant writing, that could be substantially more, right?
Okay, I mean, I'm just thinking of our community that's saying, you know, we knew you were gonna come ask for more money.
No, I don't think we're saying that. What we're saying is,
And that
Right.
amount of money that's on there, that's a drop, like, that's so much better than I thought it was gonna be. You know, and that's
Yeah, right.
before the grants, that's before the fundraising. And we're not going to the community for handouts and, yeah.
I think, and Evan, I don't know if this is true or not, but what strikes me in this presentation is the value proposition of this particular facility and purchasing it and the amount of stuff we get out of it, the amount of benefit for the community that we get, given the relatively low cost, or the low amount of revenue, existing revenue that we're gonna have to use for that.
Right.
Hey, Skylar, this is, what I put on the screen quickly, just so I can.
I think it would be great,
we can-
yeah. I know we talked
Okay.
about it in one of our meetings, but yeah, for this bigger audience, it might be nice.
Yeah, so I think it was Sue that brought that up, and I apologize if it wasn't, but this is the national data for Parks and Recreation agencies. So on a national, I'm going to go quickly through this, and I won't break down the categories, but on a national average, a Parks and Recreation agency spends $88 per person on operations annually, and it generates $19.38 of revenue per person, which means that its cost recovering from operations on an average basis, a Parks and Recreation agency only generates a 23% cost recovery from programs and services like where we're generating revenue in the pro forma that we just showed you. The overwhelming majority of Parks and Recreation budgets, when you cover the full cost of operating the agency, 61% comes from general fund tax support. Only 23% comes from programming revenue, and then everything else is, in this case, as it's categorized here, levies, other taxes, grants, other sources of revenue like fundraising, and then sponsorships from outside groups. So to the point that Celeste just brought up, you know, it's approximately an 80% cost recovery, and for an entire Parks and Recreation agency, cost recovery on average is 23%. So this is typical. Almost every single one of these facilities in the country, if you isolate the operations, has a negative bracket at the bottom line, and it's covering the rest of that through these other sources. That is very, very common, and this is something that obviously, before you communicate out the operating and just have the negative $225,000 per year in the hands of the public, it's got to be paired with this information. Average cost recovery, 23%. Aquatics cost recovery is typically 20 to 60%, depending on it, or whatever it may be. In this facility, with the programming and, to Celeste's point, the value proposition of impact on the community is also cost recovering 80%, better than the average facility, because of the spaces that you've got, the programs that you've got, the opportunities that you've got, you know, to bring people into this facility.
The 20% is the cost of providing a service to the community. We're not in the business to make money.
Right.
Thank you, Evan.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask you one really very basic question? What does
Sure.
pro forma mean?
Financial forecast.
Thank you.
No problem.
Celeste, make any questions?
I don't have any immediate questions. It's very ambitious. I think we could look at, you know, that we have Northwest Education Service District, which has a 2-year lease right now. I think it's possible we've left some money on the table there. You know, we need to look at that. We need to look at our growing expense with regard to energy and utilities. and possibly increasing personnel staff. Anyway, we need to make a plan so that we grow into this in a sensible kind of way and keep it balanced as we go.
I would just like to thank you guys for putting on this presentation, and I truly look forward to the final report. It's, very clear that it's gonna be in-depth, and, yeah, I appreciate your, time.
So, yeah, Celeste and I had we've had a peek at the pro forma because we've had these Zoom meetings periodically, as we've been able to, and I know Sue would be happy to look at the same things. And when we get the final report or sooner.
Yeah. Evan, we're not necessarily in a rush, but when do you anticipate, I guess, the final report being shared with us?
Well, we are pretty far down the path of the draft of the final report. Our recommendation, and I'll have to check with Susie because she's project managing that portion. But our goal is to, if you said everything's perfect, finish it up, stamp it, let's go, we'd have it done before Christmas for you.
Yeah.
That said, my recommendation is not to do that. It's to take this summary level report and have another follow-up discussion after you've gotten a chance to break that down and identify more questions so that we're not delivering final, we're delivering, after we've had a chance to discuss in more depth.
Okay.
And then can I also ask you, given this preliminary information, which by the way is fantastic and I think really helps with putting some data behind what the vision was for this facility, so I'm greatly appreciating it. But I'm wondering about wrapping back to the community stakeholders and communications. Do you have recommendations about where the appropriate level, the right time to wrap back to some of those community stakeholders that you met with? Do you have suggestions about that?
Yeah, so what not included in this scope is something we oftentimes do, and that's a final public presentation where this is summary level, but it's in depth for your ears and eyes. But we would consolidate this into an even greater summary level executive deck that wraps up the report, so that as you have the actual full report, the community and the stakeholders get a chance to hear the punchline, if you will, and to interact in that reaction. My recommendation is to do that, and the reason for that is our report, as you expect as a board, is going to be very in-depth. The number of people who are interested in the results of the report will be a lot, and the number of people who have the patience or the time to sift through an 80-page document or whatever it is, and understand all the details, that is a fraction of the people that you want to communicate the message to. So my recommendation would be, whether you do it as a board, or if you want to figure out how we could support in one way, shape, or form in something that's outside of the scope but not difficult for us to add, that there is a public presentation of the results at an executive summary level.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think I'm good.
Evan, Sid, appreciate you so much, your work and your talents, and spending a couple hours with us. I think we'll let you go, and we'll wrap up our workshop and be in touch soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for your time again. I will save this presentation, send it over to you tonight. You can distribute it from there.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Okay.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy holidays.
Oops. Yes. Very good. You want to click that off for? Okay. That was.
Good job managing the technology there, Darren.
Yeah. Thank you, Darren.
That was really good.
Flawless.
I only had to click a couple buttons. Great.
A little different setup in here, but, and thank you to the Tillamook Transit District
Yes.
for gifting us this really nice system.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that sound is perfect in here.
Yeah, it was,
That big
it's
thing
a,
above the TV?
Yeah, and what's really cool is we didn't really get to see how how functional it was, but it zooms in and finds the speaker and can kind of help with.
Who provided that?
The Tillamook Transit District got an extra one, or something happened
They
purchased
bought it at the beginning of COVID. They never actually ended up using it, and Kathy Leachek actually had kind of directed me to them, and
Fantastic.
yeah, they packed it up in a box and sent it to us.
Well, they're on that big screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we paid $60 for shipping for a $3,500 system.
Yeah.
So it really,
Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
How fabulous.
Yep.
Okay, moving on, board comments. Sue,
Oh, no.
make it short and sweet, Sue.
Happy holidays to everybody. What happened to Erica? I mean,
She had to leave, a little bit early because of, basketball.
no, but her leg.
Oh, that too, she actually broke her foot,
Just last night, or
yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. So basically, my first comment would be, appreciation for what we have accomplished this year. And a positive outlook toward, what's coming. The fact that it is so comfortable to, look at the group of us, that we don't seem to have other agendas, so that there's not a competition. There can be forthright conversation with employees and board, and I mean, I'm just so grateful for that type of relationship compared to what there was before, because it means that we can move forward and accomplish something. And so I wish, happy holidays, happy new year. Let's see what we can do next year. Here we go.
Thank you, Sue. Celeste?
I just want to extend a big thanks to Skylar. I know, when we talked about initially doing outside contractors and bringing them in to assist with this process, the lift is not light for you and your staff, and I have great appreciation that staff, has been willing to put in extra work, and I think it's showing up here. I mean, I think having this outside expertise really will help, the Park and Rec District sort of get to a next level, and I think that's super exciting, and really excited to see what unfolds for us in 2022.
Mike?
fairly spoken. No, that's great. It really is the end of it's been a heck of a year, The last 2 years with COVID and everything has been really rigorous alone, but we've reached a huge milestone, getting to this point, and it looks very promising. I'm sure you all look forward to seeing the final report. Appreciate your work, Skylar, great deal, and I'm happy to work with everybody here on the board, and thank you for your friendship.
Thanks, Mike. I was just, reflecting back on this year and how far we've come and where we started and what we've navigated through. I think we've accomplished some pretty amazing things. I think we, going through the election, going through the purchase, going through COVID, I'm very proud of us. I'm proud of this board. I'm proud of the fact that we can, we may not always agree on everything, but we can come together and discuss it and have open conversation and work together towards the welfare of the community. And I'm incredibly proud and thankful of our staff. I mean, this district would not be anywhere without the staff that we have. We have an amazing employees that I feel honored to call a lot of them my friends, and that's strictly from coming and visiting them and them being welcoming and helpful and just really inviting. And I think the reputation of our district is truly on our staff and the frontline people that make it what it is. And I'm thankful to be part of that. So with that, happy holidays, and we will see everyone in the new year. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Kathy.